And it's recording. So, yes, it is recording. Yeah. Today I'm going to talk to Ship of Fools cast about biodynamics, regenerative agriculture. I'm tripping over my words already.
Yeah.
More or less, and Rudolf Steiner and things like this. And he's very knowledgeable in this. I think I didn't even really know hardly anything about it until I saw one of his own podcasts with somebody else. So, I mean, I knew a bit about Steiner, but I didn't know the details of his agriculture stuff, which is quite interesting and I think correct. And so I thought we should talk about that. And he's down in Australia, which is a very strange place. And he was just telling me how it's very strange. And I believe it is very strange. Whenever I think of Australia, I just think of Mad Max. I don't really think of anything else. I know it's cliche probably, but I mean, what a great
quite
movie.
Quite cliche, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like that at all. You're not going around your bike on the open roads. And...
No, we don't. Unfortunately, I'd kind of like that actually if we were doing that. But actually, when you originally asked me that question, I went surfing that day, and I was sitting there in the crystal clear waters underneath me in a very temperate winter. I think it was about 20 degrees Celsius, that is.
Oh.
And I was just thinking, why am I Australian? That's a good question. and all I could think was it's some, terrible cosmic retribution for my Irish ancestry. That's all I can think. And I was being severely punished.
It sounds punishing, all right. Surfing in the warm climate, and it sounds terrible. I mean,
completely awful. Gazing on thousands of miles of white sand beaches with no one on them. So just terrible. Absolutely.
And
terrible.
here it's the middle of summer, and well, not middle of summer, but like it's supposed to be warm, and it's of course cloudy and raining.
Yeah, sounds awful. So as I always say to people, don't come here.
Well, it's a weird place. I can never get my mind around it or how it is. And I think you even hinted that you can barely as well. It's one of these sort of open landscape places that's just like, what am I? Where am I? And it's weird. And like, so many things can kill you and all that. But I mean, everyone knows this, I guess. We shouldn't prattle on about it. Deadly spiders, deadly snakes. Do you ever get bitten by a snake or a spider?
I never have. My uncle actually got bitten by a snake called a great southern taipan, which is the second most poisonous snake on the planet, I think. Jeez. And somehow he survived that. Yeah. But his hair turned white and he went blind, but he survived. So people do get bitten, but I've been fortunate so far. I have not. Yeah.
Well, it's a good, rugged, manly place where you can, wrestle with saltwater crocodiles and things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
mean, we all do that. We all do that. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I go back to Canada, the first thing I notice, this is going to sound harsh now. I'll try to say it in a non-harsh way, but is that I think people look kind of physically, how do I say it? How could I say this? I notice as soon as I get off the plane that people look kind of physically different. I think it's from getting more sunlight generally or something like that. They don't get that much sun here. You notice when you're here, there's a great, paleness, which is fine. I mean, there's no problem with that, but it's kind of, it's not just that. It's kind of physical difference, slight, I was going to say deformities, but more like slight. I think just from not getting as much sunlight. I think when you get more sunlight like that, you get a sort of larger, more comely, better formed human specimen. This might be my bias, and maybe I'm talking nonsense, but I've noticed this. Not to offend any Irish people. I mean, I'm Irish. I'm living in Ireland, so fuck off. Don't bother me.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I mean, on the other hand, you can get too much sun and it can kill you. Like here, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's like the sun is about 1 kilometer away. That's what it feels like. It's unbelievable in summer, and you just want to die. So it's a happy medium, I think. I generally agree. People that have a lot of sun spend a lot of time outdoors for sure. There's some difference in the phenotype, shall we say?
Yeah, it does. It affects the growth of the human, I think, and even having the broader landscapes, the open vistas of like Canada and Australia, you have as much space as you want, basically. I think it makes a larger boned specimen or something. Or people, I can notice this physiognomy from location a little bit, anyways. But and that's another thing. If we're going to talk about biodynamics, like Australia in terms of farming, I don't even know Is it remotely similar? You got these weird fucking baobabs and kangaroos and shit. Like, is it like, can you like farm turnips and carrots, and or do you have to grow like weird exotic, like, I don't know, Japanese, what's the horseradish stuff they use, wasabi, or like, is it like,
Mm.
is it like normal farming kind of? Let me just ask that off the bat.
Yeah, normal farming, normal
Yeah.
normal vegetables. Yeah, we pretty much just have a European diet. There's nothing too exotic here. And maybe with the Asian population that have moved here recently, you get like probably a greater variety of various Asian vegetables and stuff like that.
Right.
But overall, it's the same 3 veg and meat Anglo kind of diet that the diaspora has, anywhere they went. So nothing particularly creative. But I think, as we'll see with biodynamic agriculture, it actually developed here in a big way, probably more than anywhere else. And I think I put that down to, surprisingly. And I put that down to the fact that our soil is terrible, absolutely terrible.
Is it?
We have topsoil, barely any like really good agricultural land. And as a result, I think the farmers that do biodynamic farming have had to adapt significantly to the landscape. And so there is a lot of creative agriculture going on here. And to be honest, when I found that out, I was somewhat surprised. Obviously, we have the big monocultural setups, so big crops, big cropping and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where they just pump fertilizers into terrible soils because our soil, as I said, is bad.
Yeah.
And of course, another thing here is water management, which is a huge thing because we have bugger all water, like hardly any. So all these elements have kind of led to creative farmers, I would say, actually, because they have to be creative to make it work.
Right.
Eventually. Yeah.
So it's because it's not because of a proliferation of the Waldorf schools or something.
No, I don't think so. No, I think it was really just by necessity. To be honest.
No, that's cool. No, so it's once again just a unique place with a unique Mad Maxian view. So we should start off by explaining then, because a lot of people don't even know what I mean. I barely knew what it was. So regenerative agriculture. Can you tell us what it is and the reasons and purpose of it? Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I think I've got a really good quote that I like to start off with, and this is I forget who said it, but basically the way he described agricultural systems was that they're prone to exponential decay or exponential regeneration, and that's the way he described it. And in general, regenerative agriculture realizes and it seeks to tilt things towards exponential regeneration. And biodynamic agriculture in particular falls under this umbrella, I guess. So I think the best way to understand what exponential regeneration is perhaps maybe to talk about what exponential decay entails in agricultural systems, if you want to go through that.
Sure.
I think a big thing for regenerative agriculture is soil and soil degradation. That is pretty much forms the basis of the entire thing. And, I often see all these people talk about climate change and overpopulation and everything else like this as civilizationally threatening events. But I rarely, weirdly enough, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but I never hear about soil retrogression or degradation.
Yeah, rarely. I remember hearing Varg and some guys talk about it, like, obscure people.
Varg, yeah. I think he may have done, actually. I think I may have seen that video. But for sure, it's a massive problem. It's a huge problem, and whether or not you believe in civilization or not, it's not really the point. But in my opinion, it's pretty much the most catastrophic scenario we face. Just as a statistic to put it into context, I think we're losing annually. The last time I read was 24 billion tons of fertile soil a year due to erosion worldwide, which works out to be about 3.4 tons every year per person on the planet. Right. So it's insane. It's not sustainable in any way. The other question, of course, is the fertilizer question. So fertilizers are a necessary part of mass agriculture because the soil is destroyed. So the only way you can do a huge crop is to use a ton of fertilizer. one thing people don't understand about fertilizer is to make a metric ton of fertilizer, you require basically a metric ton of oil to do this. So it's an extremely oil intensive industry. Some use natural gas, but typically it's oil that gets used. So to synthesize fertilizers, you need several ingredients. You need ammonia, you need something called phosphoric acid, and then you need something called triple superphosphate. And in triple superphosphate, they have sulfur. And the way that they get sulfur is they extract that from oil or natural gas. So that's why you must have oil to make fertilizer, or natural gas, or some kind of fossil fuel that you can extract sulfur from, right?
Okay.
So to make matters worse, of course, you need to transport the raw materials to the fertilizer factory by ship. Usually, you got to ship the fertilizer out. Blah blah blah, and you can see that you're building up this use of resources. It's very intensive. On top of that, of all the ferts used around the world, I think about 36 million tons go to waste. They get washed off the farm. They go into water resources. You get issues to do with eutrophication, which is the pollution of water resources. You have biodiversity loss, and you can think all the other impacts that come along with this, with fertilizer going into systems.
Yeah.
So over time, you can see how this kind of situation leads to something that you would classify as exponential decay. So this is one of the things that regenerative agriculture seeks to reverse. It's seeking to reverse this impact on the natural environment. Right. The problem is, as I see it, is regenerative agriculture is not as economically viable. So people want cheap food. They don't really care about the quality. So they've developed these large-scale agricultural economic models and supply chains, basically, to ensure that they get cheap food. And these are one of the problems that farmers wrestle with, right? I think.
Yeah. The factory farm, the Walmartism, just give them the most expedient.
Yeah, 100%.
And keep it turning over. So
Absolutely.
In Australia's case, it's different because, as you're saying, the soil was already ruined. So it's slightly different. And so you guys already started out with a slightly more healthy view because you could see the end result. Is that?
No, I think. Well, I think that there are more people that are open to it. Put it that way. Right. We still have monoculture, so we have huge cane farms, say up north in Queensland, which has had an impact on the barrier reef to some degree, because all the fertilizers wash off into the rivers, go onto the reef, and it gets kind of ruined. Right. But arguably, I don't know the extent of that, but it is a problem. So we definitely have that. But on the other hand, because a lot of farms go under quickly because the soil gets ruined, by necessity, the farmers definitely are willing to investigate other options, I think.
Right.
Which is why biodynamics has become as prominent as it has in Australia.
Yeah. So in biodynamics, does it not, the main solution is cow manure, yes? Or am I wrong? Or
sorry, say that again.
One of the main solutions to this is cow manure. To use that.
Yeah. We can go into that maybe a little bit later.
Okay, sure.
Specifically how that works, but cow manure is a big thing, and they have these things called preparations, and they use these preparations to build the soil effectively. But I think in general, in regenerative agriculture, that's basically what they seek to do as well. They just go about it a little bit differently. But there's a guy on YouTube. His name's Richard Perkins. Pardon me.
Okay.
And he's a farmer. He has a great channel. He has a farm in Sweden, I think, and he integrates regenerative agriculture and also biodynamics, but not so much biodynamics. But he basically has a regenerative venture.
Right.
And I recommend everyone go and check out his channel. There's a ton of resources on there, and he does really, really excellent videos. Okay. But he described regenerative agriculture really well. And the way he described it was, and I quote, "If you look at nature, I see everything is looking after its own needs in the service of all. everything is patterned to be of benefit to the whole, but not without taking care of its own needs first. The deeper I study ecology and the patterns and relationships in the natural world around me, the more glaringly obvious it becomes that this is the default setting of all life. That's the end of
Yeah.
that quote. And that really sums it up, man. That's exactly what they're going for in general.
Yeah, these are sort of conclusions I reached on my own by like doing my own gardening here. I know it sounds stupid, not to that profound degree where I would say something so eloquently, but more or less what this is what I would think myself, just from noticing how certain things grow over here and grow over there, and doing my own compost, and the way things want to grow in certain areas, and then how just that what you're saying, how it relates to everything. Like it's very local. It's my garden. It's maybe similar to the other gardens in the neighborhood or whatever, but it is unique in that way. And the interrelation between other things, you know, there's give and take, and you may lose a crop of this one year to a carrot fly or this and that. But if you like try to do what the factory farmers do, which is to ensure a crop of carrots every year by any means necessary, then you destroy those interrelations. And this is more or less what he's saying. I would say, like, this is what they're doing that is ruinous, is that they, by ensuring that you know, by through chemicals, fertilizer, and all these other means, and they're not only destroying the soil, but the interrelations are gone. The food itself is losing its nutrition as well as the soil, so it's not even as healthy for you. So, I mean, taking all those into account is I guess what you would call biodynamics. Maybe we should explain that as well. Then should we get into that, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just quickly on that, and you make some really excellent points. The way Richard describes everything is, you know, he describes it as effectively the holistic management of the earth, mimicking the ecosystem. And then when you model out your enterprises, you try to use locally procured inputs and outputs. And in many ways, you can think about the political implications of this. Like I notice a lot of people on Twitter talking about, you know, we've got to do this politically, you've got to do that, blah, blah, blah. But something that's so fundamental as growing food locally, using local inputs. And you can imagine reducing your reliance on technology and global supply chains is a huge thing that localist agriculture, you know, helps. But I agree. It's a huge thing, and working within those systems is how people probably need to start thinking about food production. As far as
and let alone the tastiness of the food is as well. Not just tastiness, but the health benefits of the food and everything. Like what do they call it? What is that Michael Sharon calls it? First things, like getting back to first things, which is from, I forget where he gets that from. Like knowing and understanding food and where your food is coming from, or like, you know, husbanding it yourself. Having that relation right directly to the thing, and taking it and I believe that's also Steiner's philosophy, is that it is of utmost importance, agriculture. And so
absolutely. He spoke about food production, like, you know, in terms of being a cultural and communitarian thing to do, right? So he saw it as you know, the bad element being doing things mechanistic, feeding something as a mechanistic unit to feed mechanistic units. Or the alternative that he gave was, you know, shepherding the earth, enhancing the earth, and by extension, enhancing human culture. It's a huge thing that we've obviously gotten away from in a big way. How even in his time, right? Even in his time, things were starting to go that way in a big way.
Well, he started writing about this in the 1920s, was it? Am I right?
Yeah. 1924 is when he did his lectures, his agricultural lectures. But,
right. And I believe he was inspired by, in the first, was it the First World War, when Germany was what do you call it? Not blockaded, but when they won't let shipping in and out or whatever, and they were out of nitrates for their fertilizer. And they discovered a new way to get nitrates out of the air or something like that. And this set him on the path of thinking about this and the importance of this, is what I read. Maybe you know more about that than I do.
No, I wasn't aware of that, actually. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That would make sense. It would make perfect sense. He did do it after World War II. Oh, sorry, World War One. So yeah, it would make sense. As far as I know, he did write it in 1924, but you know, it could have well and truly have been underway in his mind prior to that. Makes sense.
I believe he did a lot of lecturing too, and a lot of his lectures are lost. He didn't write them down. He just would give like amazing talks, and we don't have them.
It is sad. Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, we've
And
lost a lot of.
what do you think of his theories about it being related to cosmology, the sun, the moon, Mars, Jupiter, and all that?
It's a funny one, you know. It's a funny
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I will say this: like everyone I've spoken to,
yeah.
local farmers around here, people I've interviewed on the podcast, they all swear by it.
Do they?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, cool.
So you know,
I think it's great. Yeah, good,
yeah,
good.
people that are listening, maybe they don't know, but you know, effectively, biodynamic growers, they have sowing charts, and the way that they sow plants or seeds is by the moon and the stars, constellations, and the position of the moon. And
Yeah,
this forms the basis of how they manage their growing, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. But
yeah,
they say it works, you know. And
yeah,
who am I to argue with that? I'm just some guy in a city, so I'm
yeah.
going to believe them every time.
So you
But
haven't tried. You haven't tried a bit of You're really into it. I thought you would have been. Are you studying agriculture or anything like that? Or
no, I'm not studying. It's just a personal interest.
oh,
Yeah, I just feel like it's important in the context of everything that I care about. So I've come
yeah,
to understand it fairly well. But
yeah.
I do intend to try it out at some point. I have plans, put it that way. But
Right, right, right. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. That's excellent. So let's his other. Okay. So have we didn't really. Maybe should we explain more who Steiner was or
sure,
like
sure. We can go
yeah,
through it.
yeah,
So it definitely was an interesting character. He was Austrian, not
yeah.
German. A lot of people think he's German, but he wasn't. Like someone else prominent that we
Right.
won't go into.
No, no,
Um,
no.
so he was a polymath. He basically attacked a vast array of subjects. He was that really archetypal 20th century genius type. So not bound by kind of hyper specialization. He is very much a Renaissance man, I guess, with a huge breadth of knowledge. I think in his younger years, he was influenced by Goethe and Arthur Schopenhauer, and a lot of his philosophy kind of was developed from there. Um, I think basically today he's kind of seen as a philosopher, kind of social reformer, maybe an architect, and probably foremost an esotericist. um,
Yeah,
as and an agriculturalist, obviously, is what we've just been talking about. But
yeah, yeah,
I think initially he was recognized as a literary critic, and he published lots of philosophical works during this time, including a book called The Philosophy of Freedom, which is one of his prominent works. Um, at the beginning of the 20th century, and what he's probably most famous for, was founding the spiritual movement Anthroposophy, which I think he's probably best known for, right? For those who don't know, Anthroposophy is kind of an outgrowth of the German idealist philosophical movement at the time. It's also blended with theosophy, and it had other kind of influences like Goethean science and even Rosicrucianism, which I wasn't aware of until recently. But he kind of synthesized all these things together. And the reason he did that is because I'm led to believe that he thought there was a significant division between the arts and sciences and people's spiritual pursuits. And he really wanted to aim at pulling all these things together as using these things as a foundation of a new way of seeing the world effectively. And it's from this that biodynamic agriculture sprung effectively,
mm,
along with some other things. What I like about Steiner is that he wasn't just sitting there in a library endlessly poring over books, just having ideas about ideas, like many people at that time. He was very much putting his words into action.
yeah.
And as you may know, you mentioned Waldorf schools. We
Hmm.
had biodynamic farming. He had medicinal stuff, curative education, something called eurythmy, which is like a weird form of dancing or bodily movement as an art form.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
actually pretty interesting if you check it out. There
I'm
were
sure it is.
numerous Christian communities that he set up. He was
Right.
into architecture. So he had all these things, and his principles effectively form the basis of these real world applications. And the agriculture was one element.
Yeah.
But what I like about the guy is he was a big picture thinker. And whatever you think about him, if you think it was nonsense, whatever it is, you definitely can't criticize him for having this big picture style of thinking and this ability to synthesize all these things.
Yeah, truly. And no, his powers of observation were. I haven't read that much Goethe, so I don't know if he got it from that. But he had like even his opening, one of his opening chapters on one of his books. I haven't read the books. I listened to it like on YouTube or something. But it was a fascinating sort of scientific / esoteric explanation of the seed. I don't know if you ever read this.
No,
and like how portions of the seed, how the kernel of the seed is the beginning of chaos. All the elements that lead to the creation of the seed are like order coming into motion, and the seed itself is like chaos sprung free. And part of it is sort of cosmic and related to the stars and the planets, and the other part is sort of Terran related to the earth and the soil. And I mean, I can't do it justice trying to explain it, but it was just you could see it was like a vast open mind, like observing the world in that kind of amazing hyper intellectual / naive way, which is like perfect individual observation, let's say. But so he's like you say, he's a polymath. I mean, all these things, and he was a man of action, so he put it all into action and he tried it all. And he was certainly, I believe he was directly correct in he made a what do you call it, not a prophecy, but he said something. He was talking about bee production, bee farming, whatever you call it. And around his time they started making artificial queens. You know about this?
Yeah, I do know about this.
You know the story. And he predicted, he said, okay, that's fine. He's like, someone asked him what's going to happen from this, and he said, okay, you're going to have great production of honey for 60 years or something, and then it's going to go awry. And that's right around that time is when they started with the collapse. What do they call it? The collapse thing that happens in the US, where the hive collapse syndrome or whatever they call it. Yeah. And he was right. He predicted it like to the decade.
It's crazy, isn't it? Really? Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I have heard of that. It is a serious problem. I actually didn't know about it until recently. I find it amazing that you have artificial queens, but they've basically completely stuffed with the system that bees have, and I find that a stunning thing to try and do. But
it's a typical factory materialist way of just like, we need honey. Like that's all they think about. They don't. They don't think about the long term or anything.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. Ever since that took over, that's that whole. I think, frankly, it was Evola put it one of the best. I don't know if you read him in his described. He was comparing communism and the American capitalist system and saying how American capitalism is actually slightly worse because of the way it quantifies the world into this kind of factory hours, and everything is like materialized to this point. And that's really where it comes from. I think it's like that hyper materialism. It totally in ignorance of something like biodynamics, where things are interrelated, or let alone anything. You can't even begin to think of anything like spiritual or, talking about the planets and or even caring about something down the road past your own life. Like you've told those bee guys 60 years it's going to collapse. They're like, well, whatever, we'll get 60 years of honey, and all the bees maybe die, but this is typical. I don't know it's like the system. It's like, or the way Ted Kaczynski talks about the system, where the system itself is this entity that controls their minds, and they can't. They just have to obey. I don't know. But Steiner is the opposite. Steiner is the opposite of that kind of thing, and he's a man of solutions. That's why it's great to hear people in Australia are applying his methods to success, I guess. I mean,
and I think interestingly, I think people have kind of moved beyond him as well. So he put principles down, but I think biodynamic farming, as far as I can tell, has developed significantly since that time. And it's another interesting thing. It's kind of like a living knowledge, and the farmer intuits the landscape, and he learns things about his particular land, and then he passes that on, and so on and so forth. It's like a living body of knowledge, which is something that I consider very important.
So he has to think of the farm like a living organism in a way, isn't that right? Is that part
100%? Of it? Yeah. You think about it like a living organism, and you're kind of almost like an artist. You're using these liminal processes to read the landscape effectively. That's what I understand. And the farmers.
Sorry, go on. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and the farmer, needs to. They can spend decades basically getting to know their land, and many farmers have told me that you know, I'm only just now starting to get it, and I'm going to retire in, you know, 5 years. So like, it's an interesting element of things that, you know, you can spend your whole life trying to get your head around things. And it's unfortunate because I think like what a big part of it is you need a younger generation that are there to learn also and to receive that knowledge about that landscape. But it's not really happening. Young people are not interested in this in any way. So it's
except for you.
Except for me, and I live in a city, so what am I going to do?
You've got to start a culture. You got to start a cult of young people.
Yeah, I think I will. Yeah,
you should. Yeah. You get these. You're a man of influence. You can do it. So another thing you mentioned that I don't know what it is, which maybe is related to precisely to what we're saying: terrestrial biomes, soil, and how regent agriculture fits in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, something. Yeah, I've been thinking about a bit, and it ties in with regenerative agriculture and biodynamic agriculture. Not explicitly because it is a scientific notion, but we all know about the human microbiome. We know, you know, what it's responsible for in the gut. We know all the behavioral and health consequences of it being in a dysbiotic state or in a bad state. I think most people are across that. I think that what people don't have a good understanding of is the soil also has this. So the terrestrial biome has a huge bacterial mass that lives in it.
Yeah.
And I think recently scientists have come out with this concept called a holobiont. And what a holobiont is, it's kind of reimagining of the human organism and all the organisms on the planet to also include the microbiota as part of the organism, as a single selective unit, so to speak. So in a way, they're acknowledging that we have the human genome, but we also have the genome of the microbiota, and they all form basically one superorganism. And this superorganism is called the holobiont. So basically, it's a concept it's right at the edge still, but it's emerged over the last couple of years, and it basically, we're kind of like a lumbering system, and we interact with the microbiota around us and the soil within us all around the place. And interestingly, within this superorganism, there are actually gene transfers that go on amongst us and the microbiota. And also, so they're called what's called a horizontal gene transfer, which means that what you have in your gut, which by extension is probably from what you consume and what you've been around your whole life, passes on genes, and it can literally change the genotype of the human being. And over time, through lateral gene transfer, which is obviously passing what you pass on to your children and stuff like that, is you can actually have changes to the phenotype from this horizontal gene transfer of the microbiota in the soil, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. So what that means basically is that microbiota are shaping human evolution to a large degree.
And so how do we shape it back in return? It's when we create waste in our compost and our sewage, it goes back into the soil. Is that?
Yeah, precisely. Or it's complicated. I don't pretend to understand the exact mechanisms, but it's very much a two-way street. So you can think about it that the genes are interacting. So the microbiota interacting on us, the environment is interacting on us and the microbiota, and the reverse is the case also. So it's a very symbiotic, dynamic relationship. So
that's a terrestrial biome, you would say.
Well, a terrestrial biome refers more to plant life and animal life, and you know, the aquatic environment, for example. But within the terrestrial biome, you have the microbiome of these terrestrial biomes, and this is where we're getting this notion of the holobiont.
Right.
So, pardon me. So, one example of this that you might find interesting is the Japanese digestive system. And this is one of the examples that they've used to verify this theory, is that, the Japanese, famous for consuming algae, well, seaweed.
Yeah.
Over time, one of the bacteria on the seaweed has done a horizontal gene transfer at some point, and as a result, the digestive system of Japanese people in general has changed. So that's one way that the biota in the soil can actually change the physical phenotype of a population over time.
Yeah.
So I guess the point of me saying all this is that with monoculture and stuff like that, what you're effectively doing is you're destroying the microbiota in the soil. You're putting, it's kind of like having a screwed up gut as a human. It's exactly the same in the soil. The soil, in a way, is a bit like a stomach. If you think about it that way, right? It's kind of like it's full of bacteria. You're meant to have a big diversity of bacteria.
It's kind of digesting things in its own way.
100%. And, you know, the bacteria that live there are very dependent on the landscape and, you know, where it is. And that's a very individual thing as well. So you can envisage a situation in which tribes of humans that lived in a certain place over time, their evolution is very much tied up with the type of bacteria and the type of microbiota that are in that environment in which they lived for a long time. And they played a very important role in the selection of human beings over time. And I think one of the biggest problems with monoculture that we're going to face, and something that no one's talking about, is besides the soil quality problem and soil just not existing anymore, is actually the dysbiosis of the microbiota in the soil.
What does that mean?
So it's
dysbiosis.
So dysbiosis refers to an imbalance, essentially, of bacteria. And usually you refer to your gut. If someone has a gut problem, if you have too many of one phyla of bacteria, for example, in humans, you have two main types of phyla. You have one called the Firmicutes phyla, and then you have another one called Bacteroidetes. Because of the Western diet, for example, people tend to have a lot of Firmicutes, which are sugar-feeding bacteria. And if you have a bad diet and you have too many of these kinds of bugs in your gut, it can lead to all sorts of physical problems in your gut. And what this is referred to as is dysbiosis. This is what dysbiosis is. And I'm just applying that label to the soil, because what we've seen with monoculture is that it can lead to basically a destruction of the diversity of the bacteria within an environment. And what I'm getting at, I guess, in general, is that if this continues to be the case and we continue to create a dysbiosis of bacteria in the soil, we're literally screwing with the mechanisms of natural selection, effectively.
Yeah. So in the modern, okay, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and over time, you can imagine the problems we're going to experience, not just health problems, but literally maybe a lessening of the human being. Or
I'd say we've already been lessened, to be honest.
In
the most part, but like, definitely, you're right. Monoculture. See, when I think of monoculture and like the corporate way of doing things, it applies to both agriculture and architecture and other things Steiner was interested in. It's like we're creating in our pursuit for safety and permanence and cycles. Like we can't stand to have a crop fail and like miss out on anything. So everything must flow along, you know, the shells must be stocked or whatever. We are creating like a false imitation of what the thing is supposed to be. Like even life itself is supposed to be. It's like modern architecture is like, doesn't really fulfill the purpose of true architecture. It's like a false, it's missing everything important, let's say, but it's like fulfills like the basic sort of practical needs, but it's like a negative false world where there's no life or soul to anything. And it's mundane and unchanging and kind of dead. Dead is really what it is. It's like a dead imitation of the real thing. We're kind of into this dead mimicry. And I would say that's maybe the same, where we're, even as ourselves, our own bodies and our food cycle, food process is also becoming like an imitation of what it should be, and is also kind of dead. It's kind of going through the motions, but the important part is missing. And if
absolutely,
if it doesn't break somehow, it will break. It's got to break, I figure, because I don't know, how can it persist, or at least it'll change in some extraordinary other new way. That's how evolution works. Probably it'll either break and we'll all die, or some mini disaster will alter it. I don't know, but anyways, I think that's what we're doing. We're not, everything is like a false imitation, which
Yeah.
maybe sounds weird, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Absolutely, pardon me. It's yeah, everything is being brought to its most basic part in a mechanistic way. And we're unfortunately we're missing the point because we're only focusing on one little part of an entire picture. And because we're
Yeah.
missing the entire picture, we're making bad choices and decisions. I think
Yeah.
it's the same thing with medicine, right? Like if you go and see a doctor, you know, and I don't know, you've got a problem with your, let's just keep it at the gut. You have a problem with the gut, but it's creating other problems in your body. Maybe you're depressed as a result, right?
Yeah.
Which we know happens. So if you have a gut problem, it can affect your mood and the way that you see things. So what the doctor will do is he'll send you to a shrink. The shrink's going to give you drugs that work specifically on the brain, because that's what that guy's been trained to do. He's just focusing on the brain. That's where depression comes from. It comes from the brain.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to focus on.
Xanax or whatever.
100%. And but he's not going to look at, okay, well, maybe I need to look at the totality of this system as a human being. Like, what is it? What's wrong with this guy? Should I look at his gut? Maybe he has a gut problem. Maybe he has a parasite. Could be anything.
Yeah.
But we don't look at things that way. And I think the same psychology applies, you know, as you say, to architecture, to farming, to all these things. We don't look at the entire picture. We just look at these constituent parts. And everyone lacks the ability. You know, and as we said, Steiner had that ability, but everyone lacks the ability to see the bigger picture. And I think that's a massive.
Well, not everyone, but yeah, we lose it more and more. Or do we? I don't know. Are more people becoming aware, or are there more people just losing the ability to stand up to try to change it? I don't know. I can't tell.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Well,
in my day-to-day life, like I don't see really anyone that is becoming more aware. Although, like, if you hang around our circles, maybe online, you would like to think so, right? But
yeah,
who knows?
Yeah. Well, you can find like easy agreement. Like, say, like who would watch this video, let's say, and be outraged in disagreement? Who's not like a total, you know, sort of system cuck, you know, guy who owns a fleet of trucks delivering ham, or something like that. I mean, most people would be like, yeah, you know, it's at least partially, mostly true. I mean, it is completely true, obviously. But let's get into the more difficult part then at this point, because let's talk about the liminal elements in farming, the spiritual elements in biodynamic farming and farming in the past. What can we say about that?
Well, I think, you know, I guess I just wanted to briefly comment on sowing by the moon and the stars and things like that. I mean,
yeah.
So recently, there's a former monk online that I did a podcast with, the Venerable Panyo Basa. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's he used to be a Theravadan monk, and he recently disrobed. But anyway, we had a conversation once, and in that he discussed a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal. And it's a great book. I recommend everyone reads it. It's fantastic. But in that book, it talks about shamans and people like this who basically live on the edge of reality. So you have a consensus reality that everyone lives in, which we could say in our case is, you know, the reality of corporations and science and, you know, the general cuckery, as you say.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have biodynamic agriculture, which kind of would be represented a bit by, you know, like a shaman, which is, it brings a liminal element into a process. So you discard the rules that everyone has, and then you bring in something that seems a little bit kooky. So in a shaman's case, you'll have the tribe going around doing the tribe stuff. Then the shaman, you know, is over there banging on a drum outside of the rules. And as a result, that gives him access to certain, I guess you say, powers, right? So I was just thinking, I was throwing this idea around that maybe some of the power that biodynamics has is actually taking advantage of this liminal element of reality. So it's kind of like, okay, we know that this is what science does. This is what monoculture does. These are the rules. But, you know, fuck that. I'm going to go and start sowing seeds to the moon and the stars because it's like outside of the rules. And I often wonder, scientifically, it seems absurd. Like, why is this going to work? It doesn't make any sense at all, right? Like when I look at it, I look at a sowing chart, and I'm like, it's ridiculous. But the more I think about it in the context of this book, I often wonder: is this what it is? Is it some kind of liminal process that goes beyond rationality, and that's why people do have success with it? I don't know what you think about that. That's kind
Well,
of
I
just,
totally. I'm always for. I am not opposed to spiritual answers to things by any means. And but I mean, even if you want to be purely rational, to be as rational as you can about it, so much of what we do and what animals do is instinctual and intuitive already. And you take many things for granted you see in the animal kingdom or that humans do, and just say, "Oh, that's instinct," But like, what is that really? Like, what does that mean? Like when a bird knows exactly what to do and when, or like those stories of like the story of a dog that got the owners drove from either the middle of America or even possibly the East Coast to California for a holiday. I think it was probably from the middle. I can't remember. And like left the dog there somehow and drove back, and figured they lost the dog. And then I think, I don't know if it was years later or whatever, the dog shows up, and it's like, okay, how did the dog do that? And it's like, I think like a shaman is someone you turn to, not to be irrational, but his answers are going to be, you're looking for someone who's in tune or intuitive, as people can be, in those unexplainable ways, those funny stories you hear. People can predict what the weather's going to do or this and that. I think he's doing his best to get in tune with whatever weird energies are at work in nature, that which we can't fathom anyways, to intuit something irrational that you can still count on. Is the best way I can put it, maybe. Hopefully that makes some remote sense what I'm babbling about.
Yeah, it does. I think essentially we're saying the same thing. Yeah, I've thought about it a lot because obviously as a Westerner, I have the sensibility where a lot of the stuff seems crazy to me. But again, talking to the farmers, they all swear by it. So yeah.
Isn't that like divining? Divining seems to work a lot of the time. I read with the rod looking for water. Is that
yeah.
You ever hear that? Yeah.
I have heard that. I actually did it once with someone.
Did you?
Yeah, I couldn't get it to work, but he could.
Oh.
But again, one of those funny things, right? Like, I've heard stories that people can divine water in Australia. That's a big thing. They used to have water diviners, all around the place. But
yeah,
I've heard other people say it's bollocks. I mean, I don't really know, but it could be.
Well,
could be one of those things.
Picture someone who's in nature a lot and is in tune with all the various little biodynamic kind of hints you might get, as well as just going with a flow of intuition, like a current is passing through the world, and you try to intuit these energies that are, or life forces and things, I guess, that are unexplainable and not on the surface. And to do that, you have to be kind of kooky and just kind of like, I don't know, meditate. I mean, I'm not good at it myself. I'm not a shaman, but I just try to think about it, because it seems to be like the scientific answer to everything goes in one direction, and it's not necessarily the truth. It's more like its own truth. It's the scientific truth. And as we can see, it leads to stagnation. It can be anti-life, not always. I think science, when it's merged with culture and this kind of, it kept in its own biome of culture and religion and stuff like this, that's when science is best served. And that's really where it comes from anyways. When you take it out and try to use it as its own thing alone, it just seems to, it becomes this system thing. Anyways, but yeah,
it's just a tool, right? Like it's I think even in the 19th century, most of those guys call it natural philosophy, and what they did was they just saw it as me finding out about God's creation. Like that's kind of in its purest form what it was. And we have this force of scientism now that's become a religion of its own. And it's a little bit funny. It's a belief system now.
It defends its own beliefs with irrationality. It will actually lie about facts to defend its own belief.
It often does, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
It's overly negative beliefs, which are like what? Nothing. But I was going to ask too, what would you consider the difference between this view to agriculture and like the more popular sort of just organic farming and stuff?
Well, the difference, as far as I can tell, is this liminal element, and that's the spiritual side of things that people are into. Yeah.
So practically speaking, there's no other, like you read about there's no dig and stuff like that.
Sorry,
Is
yeah,
that
there is that as well. So there is the element of no dig, and one thing we didn't talk about were the preparations.
Mhm.
We can briefly go through that, but effectively in biodynamic agriculture specifically, they use these things called preparations, and I think we went through it briefly. But what that is they have these number designations. So you'll hear something like preparation 500, preparation 501, and I think there are others. Basically, it goes from 500 to 507. But what they are substances. They have a recipe. They have various herbs, manure, stuff like that, and they're prepared in a very specific way. And each preparation has a focus or a purpose. You have compost preparations
Mhm.
that basically, if you want a certain outcome, you'll use a certain preparation on the compost.
Okay.
And on the other hand, you have the biodynamic preparations, which are probably the most famous ones. There's a preparation called 500, which is pretty much I would say the bee's knees of the biodynamic preparations. And
Okay.
they consider this, the farmers consider this the most powerful substance on the earth. And
Really?
what they use it for is to develop soil microbial activity and to build soil up. And what's interesting about it is they take some of the compost that they've used, that they've prepared through a very amusing mean, which is that you get cow horns and you put soil inside the cow horn and you bury it and you leave it there for about a year or something like that. Then you
Right.
take the substance and then you mix it up with all this other stuff, and you mix it up in a very specific way. You can't hit the sides of the container. I think you have to mix it clockwise, and you have to do it for like an hour or something like that.
Cool. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you only use a very small amount of this soil. And you
Okay.
throw it in, and basically you just go around your farm and you just spray this stuff. And it's kind of like homeopathy a little bit. They're using just a minuscule amount of this soil.
Mhm.
And again, it's one of these things I was initially skeptical of.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking to these guys, like they swear by this stuff, man. Like they just think it's just amazing. And
That's great.
this one farmer in particular, I went to his farm and he showed me at the barrier of his farm and the farm next door, effectively. And he showed me the soil difference in the height of the topsoil.
Yeah.
And he had at least, I would say, 10 to 15 centimeters at the edge compared to the paddock next door. And he purely puts this down to the use of 500 as a
Right.
preparation.
And
So
do they make it themselves when they do this, or do they buy it from somebody? Or
you can buy it, I think.
right.
There's several places that sell it. Yeah. So you don't have to make it yourself.
Hmm.
You do have to mix it yourself, but you don't have to make it yourself. They actually have quite large industrial scale mixers, I believe. I've seen them online.
Right.
But anyway, that's one
Yeah.
thing that separates it. The other thing that
Yeah.
separates it, as we've spoken about, of course, sowing to the moon and stars, stuff
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
So it's probably these elements primarily that are really
Are
different.
different. Yeah. So it's otherwise similar, but it has that extra, the extra liminal elements, as you say. Yeah. So that's interesting. All right. Yeah. And they do put a lot of emphasis, I believe, on cow manure. I think I read something from Steiner where he was saying the purpose of the cow on the farm is to provide manure, like first and foremost.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe more farmers just think that anyways. And I'm not a farmer either. I don't know.
Yeah, look,
But,
he was big on people using the wrong composts for the wrong purpose. And as you say, yeah, he was big on cow manure. But cow manure composted in a very specific way.
right.
So yeah, if you go online, you look it up, you can see like people packing manure into horns and then putting it underground. It's quite bizarre.
So they put the manure. It's manure they put in the horns for the.
I'm pretty sure
500.
it's a manure. I'm pretty sure. And
Oh,
then they
wow.
use that manure to make the 500. I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
Well, I might have to try this.
You can get kits online. You should try it. Just give it
I
a
will
go.
try, yeah. Because I'm just finishing a fairly large greenhouse, and I want to try and grow like very specific things in it. But I'd like to get some choice soil going for that.
Yeah,
So
great.
I will
Give it a go. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, I will for sure.
Yeah.
So what else have we got here? So now, liminal elements and implications of biomes and implications of or okay, we think we talked about that.
Yep.
Or did we? Oh, implications of superorganisms. Did we talk about that?
Pretty much. Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah.
I mean, that's this whole
Superorganisms, okay.
notion that we are a superorganism. Yeah, I think we did.
Okay, and this is the really out there part of what you want to talk about is how we view ourselves, what the self is, and the work of the no self.
Yeah. Now,
So
yeah, people may be wondering how this ties in, but I think it does, and it ties into this notion of the holobiont. So the way that we're starting to see ourselves as these superorganisms that have all these elements to them that are not under our control as such, right? You don't really have control over bacteria. You don't know what they're up to. They probably have their own things that they're
what are they up to?
Yeah, who knows? I got no idea. And another thing that I've been working on recently, and I don't know if people who know me, all the 2 individuals who listen to my podcast would know that I have.
Yeah, I listen to it.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, the other one,
3,
yeah, 3, would know that I have an interest in Buddhism. I practice Zen. I practice meditation regularly, and this has led to certain realizations, I would say, about the nature of the self. And what I call this is, or not what I call it, but it's really called the nature, sorry, the work of the no self. And what this is through meditation, through dialectic, we can come to realize that essentially the self is very much illusory. It's an illusory thing. And what I like about the agricultural element here that we've gone through today is it offers a context to show us that in many ways we are an organism that is a part of a greater whole. There are forces outside of us that shape who we are, that shape the way that we act in the world, whether it's our parents, the environment that we were brought up in, the food that we eat, the weird twists of fate that shape us. In some sense, we don't really do anything. We are just a product of what occurs around us, and we're a part of this system. I think the modern person often sees themselves as outside of everything. Like we possess a free will, for example. People have this notion of free will, which I think is absurd. And I think a lot of people have spoken about this. I think Sam Harris, who's someone that I otherwise am greatly annoyed by, did excellent work on why free will is ridiculous.
And he did a few good things. Yeah, he did a few good things. Despite himself, he had a couple of things that weren't bad.
He did, despite himself. And actually, in a way, he stole the free will thing from Buddhism. Anyway, the way that he talks about it is just the Buddhist way of talking about it. But anyway, I've gone out to my Christian brothers online, and I've challenged them to offer me, a coherent argument as to why free will is real in any way. But so far, nothing. So far, it's just been a load of bollocks. Nothing is convincing. And, the challenge is still out there. I mean, everything they send me is a load of gobbledygook. But the implication of there being no free will is, of course, that the notion we have of ourself controlling everything is also illusory. And I understand this to be the case because I've had these experiences and I've gone through this process with other people, this dialectical and meditational process. So the work that I'm really involved in at the moment is putting together a meditation suite and a kind of course for people that would like to undergo this process of essentially seeing the illusion for what it is, which is entirely possible. Now, what I like about the agricultural element is that it really reinforces this view of why free will is silly. And I think a lot of what's wrong with farming and a lot of what's wrong with the way that we view things is that we do consider ourselves separate from everything else. So when we abuse the landscape and we abuse fertilizers, and we have these attitudes towards these real mechanistic attitudes towards the landscape, I think that in many ways it's a direct result of this illusion of a separate self, this illusion of being able to impose some kind of will on something, as if we're living outside of it, right? We're not a part of it.
Where if we're a biome and we're in biodynamic and relating to it, it's just we're just an element in it. Although we are a powerful element. Obviously, we're a powerful element where we can 100%. Do the things we're doing, even though it's going to end up biting us back, and the rest of them will punish us.
Absolutely. But nonetheless, we are an element. We're only one element, and for sure we're powerful. But by the same token, you could say that the bacteria are powerful. You know, they are, right? They totally are. As we've gone through.
Yeah.
So anyway, basically, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I have this stuff going on, and one of the things I'm working on that people may be interested in the future is basically a full meditational course and a full suite of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. That's going to be, it's basically called the Great Frames of Reference in Buddhism. And what this is a process of meditation and mindfulness. And I'm going to be putting something together in this vein, as well as the dialectical work of the no self, that people that want to undergo this process can do so in a fairly easy and accessible way.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it for sure.
Well, you could be my first victim. Yeah, we can try it out, and we can go through that. Absolutely, sure. If you want to do it, I'd be more than happy. You could be the test subject. I like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's coming out soon, and basically, I just wanted to mention it because I feel like when you go through all these things that we've been speaking about, the influence of the microbiome, the influence of the dynamic systems in the earth, the fact that we're a part of everything, it just really goes to reinforce this notion that we can't really treat ourselves as separate anymore. We need to start looking at things like there's no barriers. It's kind of like a massive onion, and we're one layer of it. And I think that when people start to get this through their heads, things can start to get a little bit better.
So it's very hard, though. It is very hard, and especially in that kind of, it's not even Christian anymore. It's more like the post-Christian worldview. It's very atomized. It's very like individualistic. It's not even true individualism. It's like a faux individualism.
Yeah.
In that fake way, the fake world. But it's very hard. But many are seeking answers. So you never know how many people you can save.
Yeah, just enough. It's kind of a simple realization in a way, and it's quite liberating. Obviously, once you have it, because ironically, when you realize you have no free will, things open up. That's all I can say. It's quite bizarre like that. But,
I had a talk with a Platonist about this, and that was our conclusion as well. Although the entire first hour of the talk was I did like what we're doing, but I actually forgot to press record, and we just talked and just like lost the whole thing. And we like argued about this, and we came to the conclusion, there's no free will, and that was between us. And and then the next one we just talked for an hour again, like the next week, about how there's no free will.
Right,
it's all destiny.
Yeah, but, absolutely destiny.
That is destiny. Yeah, you may as well call it fate and destiny.
Yeah,
I mean, why not?
I agree. It's interesting. It's kind of like you look at the ancient religions, the pagan religions, how they had this notion that the gods were just playing with you, and you had a great fate, or you had a pauper's fate, whatever it is. But I think recognize on some level that they didn't really have free will. It's just kind of
I would encourage anybody who hasn't to try a bit of gardening, even if it's like on a very minor scale. That getting your hands in the dirt and successfully growing a few things and eating them if you can. Is very how can I say it gives you a feeling of wisdom and understanding that you may not have had if you didn't.
I agree and farming it's had a tough run amongst some Twitter circles. I think some people have viewed it as a form of escapism, like going to homestead and not bothering with society is kind of like viewed as a bad thing in some way. But I think it's nonsense. To be blunt, I think that being a farmer is obviously very noble work. And last time I checked, these people are going to the shop consuming food. I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing. So, this is important work. And
Yeah.
for young people in particular who have heard this and it kind of sings to them a little bit, look into it. Go and do it. I think it's an important thing that people need to do.
Yeah, it is the most
reasons I
important. That's what Steiner would have said. It's the most important, really. The connection. Agriculture comes first. It's everything. All other culture comes out from that point. It radiates out from that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that was good. What do you think? Well, that was about an hour, so
yeah, no, plenty. I'm
unless there's
about
anything
to
else you want to say. So yeah,
collapse
let us
from
know when you've got
tiredness.
your course or whatever you're calling it, and we'll do another one on that. And we'll make another video about it, I guess, or whatever you want.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, what I'll do is I'll put it together, and maybe in the next couple of weeks I'll get in contact. And the way that I like to do it, the dialectical element, which is the most important element, is basically through an email correspondence.
Okay.
And that's all you need to do. And we can go through it and see what you think.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna end the recording, and then we'll talk for a few more minutes, and then
cool.
that'll be it. All right.
Sounds good. Okay.
Goodbye.